case study as a method. It's really a session for us to talk about how we can use case studies in our research as a postgraduate researcher, be it at master's level, PhD level, or even as early career academics. The reason that both Vignes and I are co-sharing this presentation is simply because we both have used the case study method in our own research. And you'll see a couple of examples of that coming forward. What I want to achieve out of tonight is four simple objectives, really, to understand what we mean by case study at the PhD level of research. And there'll be people out there who say, oh, you can't use case study or things like this. And I'm just going to say, look, actually, they're wrong. You can use case studies. It's simply about how you frame it and how you engage with the learnings from those case studies. What I want to move into is how to understand what makes for a strong case study in our research approach. And that's what I think is going to be the most important for all of us, because it's not just about, oh, look, I've got a case study. It's actually, oh, wow, I've got a case study that can translate into key learnings that's going to be important for me to be able to disseminate as proper research. We also want to explore a little bit about the role of theory in case study research, and we'll sort of talk towards that, or talk to that towards the end of the session. And the final question, which is sort of like the very last slide that we've got actually, is to understand how many case studies we should or could use in our research approach. And I'll just sort of gently hang up something I wrote a long time ago. I used a singular case study in one particular dissertation. So there are different things to consider about that, but I want to be able to highlight that, look, a well-crafted case study, one where as the researcher you've gone into considerable depth, is actually still a very good value add to what we are doing as researchers. Now, I just held this up. I told you I'd share one. Vignes's thesis from some years ago, mine from way too many years ago for me to think of. But both of us have successfully used the case study approach and found it beneficial. And as we go through tonight, I'm sure that we're both going to sort of come back to our key learnings. What I can both say about both of our dissertations here is that they're certainly a little bit beaten up after being on the shelf for a while. So I'm guessing, they're still getting pulled out and read and looked at. I certainly know my one is. Anyway, let's start with the context, and the context of when I might want to conduct research. And there really are five main research designs. One is experimental. Now, if you're following the third degree, and if you're following me in particular, we're not going to be talking about experimental because that's well out of my wheelhouse. But it is a valid research design. The second one is cross-sectional or survey, which is where we're looking at a moment in time of a particular population. Now, many of us will perhaps be involved in this type of research. There is longitudinal, where we look over a period of time, maybe tracking participants for 6 months or for a year or even longer. I know of longitudinal studies that have gone up to 25, 30 years with the same principal authors. I just hope they're not doing their PhD at the same time, because, we want it a bit shorter. The fifth one, because clearly we're going to be talking about case study tonight, but the fifth one is comparative, when we look at something which is typically going to be cross-sectional core case study and compare it to another cross-sectional or case study from perhaps a different geography. Ultimately, case study becomes one of these main designs because we're either looking at a whole population, or we're looking at sections of the population, or we're choosing little elements, case studies or vignettes of that particular population that we can make use of. So it is a mainstream research design. It is a legitimate approach to how we might want to do things. And it is certainly very applicable to the context of postgraduate research. Now, let's just sort of do a little bit of the boring stuff. I've got a couple of quotes here. But what is a case study? So a case study is an empirical inquiry that investigates a contemporary phenomena. So it looks at something in depth and within its real life context, especially when the boundaries between the phenomena and the context are not clearly evident. We'll come to that part shortly. A case study inquiry copes with the technically distinctive situation in which there will be many more variables of interest than data points. And as one result relies on multiple sources of evidence with data needing to converge in a triangulation fashion, and as other result benefits from prior development of theoretical propositions to guide data collection and analysis. I'm losing my breath just saying that particular quote there. Case studies focus on understanding the dynamics present within a single setting, and that's the one that I like, because it is looking at a particular setting, understanding what is happening within or around, because a case study is not always inwards focused. We do look at those boundaries as well. But it is taking a singular setting. Now, a singular setting can be a confusing word. It can be, as in this particular dissertation, it can be a company, one entity, or actually mine was a group of entities owned by the same key shareholders, or it can be a little bit broader than that. For example, we might look at schools. And I know, I'm not sure if Savi is here tonight, but if she is, Savi is looking at 5 different schools in her research. So even though each school is different, there is a commonality amongst all of those 5. Now, a case study itself is simply one or several, because, it's not just about one company, one unit. It is about being the parallels, which makes it a little bit comparative. Or it might be the simple fact that every case study, say, for example, I use 5 case studies in my research. Every case study helps to build an understanding of the key points that need to be made, or they link into the others so that we see a progression or that we see a development. Now, right down the bottom of this slide is a couple of references. And Robert Yin, from 1994, Case Study Research Design and Methods, is probably one of the most prolific texts that really validated the use of case studies as a research method for us. And it's sort of one of those references that if you are going down the case study route, you can't do your research without referring to that particular text and then moving forward. But if you want something different, go for an article. Eisenhardt, slightly older, but it also showcases, at least in the context of management research, how we can use specific case studies to actually start building general theories. And that is actually what most of us, I hope, are wanting to be able to achieve as researchers as we progress. When do we use a case study? In general, and it's not exclusively, okay, because you've got to look at what your research questions are and what you're hoping to get out of this. It's when how and or why questions are being used. How is this happening? Why is this happening? When the investigator has little control over the events, and when the focus is on something that's happening right now, contemporary phenomena in real life context, rather than trying to explain something that's a little bit more historic in nature. So if we're trying to understand what the impact of the current Middle Eastern crisis is having on transport logistics, for example, we may choose to do a case study of 4 or 5 logistics companies and then work through and understand the experience they've had and the decisions that they've got to make, and then moving forward. I have a slightly older example here, but let's just go through that for the fun of it. Examples might be the study of war reporting processes in the Battle of Baghdad, for example, the analysis of the sustainability of current New Zealand tuna fishing quotas, audiences for art house films in Hamilton at the Rialto and Victoria Cinemas. We've got very specific situations that we can then actually make discussion of and suggest lessons for in terms of other particular businesses, entities, or society as a whole. I'm going to add something to this before I sort of flip over to Vignes in a moment. But a case study comes down to when you identify something that you feel a unique story is coming from. So, I gave the example of logistics firms changing patterns of transportation, behavior, etc., because I saw something interesting that was happening. And now most of us, our research questions come out of our own observations, something we've seen, something we've thought about. If you put yourself into a position like that, you've got a chance to then say, perhaps my research could enjoy or benefit from a case study approach. And if that is the case, then you've got to say to yourself, now, how do I go about using that case study approach? Whether it's one, whether it's multiple, does it help me to back up as in a mixed method study? Does it help me to back up an understanding of, say, a general perspective? Does it lead the way? Do I use a case study in moving forward? And then I go for, say, a quantitative approach with the survey or so forth. So it's really at first comes a little bit down to intuition. I feel a case study is valid in what I'm trying to do. Now I've got to then think about how will I embed the case study approach to my own research. I'm handing over to you for a while, Vignes.
Sure.
All yours, my friend.
Thank you. So right now, next slide, please. Oh, I have, okay. So right now, let's look at situational uses of cases. There's five actual method approaches to use a case study. So case studies are a very versatile tool that can be widened across many various fields and subjects. One good example is the utilization of case studies under policy, political science, and public administration. In these fields, case studies can help understand complex governance issues, policy implementation, and administrative reforms. For example, a case study might explore the implementations of healthcare reforms in a specific country, examining the challenges and success in detail. Number two, we can utilize case studies under community psychology and sociology. Case studies can delve into the social phenomena, community behavior, and psychological processes. For example, they might study the effects of community intervention programs on reducing youth crime rates in specific neighborhoods. Our third approach of utilizing case studies could be under organizational and management research. Case studies are valuable in understanding organizational dynamics, leadership styles, and management practices. For example, a case study could analyze the turnaround strategy of a failing company, detailing the steps taken by leadership in restoring profitability. We also can use case studies in city and regional planning for regional planning research. In urban studies, case studies can examine the development and impact of urban policies or infrastructure projects. An example would be a case study can be utilized to examine urban regeneration of a downtown area and its effects on local business and residents. Finally, a case study can also be utilized in academic and professional fields, such as business administration, management science, social works. In business, case studies might investigate market strategies, consumer behavior, business models. In social work, a case study might explore the impact of specific intervention on client outcomes. For example, a case study could look at the implementing of new customer relationship programs, systems in a corporation and its effect in sales and customer satisfaction. Hold on, thank you. So we move on to the next slide. What's essential characteristics of a case study research? There's 4 types of characters for a good case study. Number 1, it needs to be particularistic. This means focusing on particular instances or cases that is unique and illustrative of a larger phenomenon. For example, a case study might explore on a specific company's response to a crisis. This provides insights into crisis management practices. Number 2, it should be descriptive. Case studies provide rich, detailed data that paint a comprehensive picture on the subject being studied. This involves collecting and presenting extensive qualitative data such as interviews, observations, and documents. For example, a case study of a successful startup might include detailed descriptions on the founder's background, the development process of the product, and the market conditions at that time. Third, we look at heuristic. Case studies often serve as a vehicle for understanding new insights and understanding. They can generate a hypothesis and theories by revealing patterns and relationship with the data. For example, A case study of a successful community health program might reveal key factors that contribute to its success, which can be applied to other similar programs. It also should be inductive. Case studies often follow an inductive approach, where the general principles and theories emerge from the data rather than being imposed beforehand. This is a bottom-up approach which allows for the discovery of new insights that are grounded in the data. For example, a case study on innovative teaching methods might identify new principles and effective education based on the observed practices and outcomes. Next slide, please.
It should be on the next one already, Vignesh.
Okay. All right. What makes an exemplary case study? So a strong case study must meet several important criteria to be considered robust and credible. Number one, significance. The case must be important and relevant to the field of study. It should address a significant problem or phenomenon. For example, studying a response of a city to a major disaster provides valuable insights into disaster management and urban resilience. Number two, it must be complete. Completeness, a case study should be thorough and comprehensive, covering all relevant aspects of the case. This involves collecting sufficient data and providing a full account of the phenomenon. For example, a complete case study on the business merger would include information on the background of both companies, the negotiation process, and outcomes. Number three, consideration of alternative perspectives. It's important to consider and present different viewpoints and interpretations of the case. This ensures a balanced and unbiased analysis. For example, a case study on public health intervention should include perspectives not only from policymakers, but also healthcare providers and the affected community. This is more a 360 approach on how to utilize case studies. The fourth point is sufficient data. A case study must be backed by ample evidence, right? This should include qualitative and quantitative data to support the findings. They might involve multiple data sources such as interviews, surveys, and records. For example, a case study on a new educational program should include data from student performance records, teachers' interviews, and classroom observations. The final thing that makes a case study exemplary is engaging composition. A case study should be well written and engaging, something like a storybook. But this makes it more accessible and interesting to readers. It should involve clear and concise writing, effective storytelling, and the use of visual aids where appropriate. For instance, using charts and graphs to illustrate key data points in a business case study can make the findings more understandable and compelling to the reader. Next slide, please. Now, case studies compared to other approaches. So we have three approaches that we utilize rather other than a case study. Let's compare these case studies with other research designs to understand their unique advantages. Histories. Histories rely on documents and artifacts to study past events, where case studies focus on contemporary phenomenon. For example, a historical study might analyze the causes of World War II using records, past records, archive records. In contrast, a case study might examine current impact on social media, on political campaigns. Number two, experiments. Experiments involve manipulating variables to observe outcomes, which is not feasible in a social science. In other hand, case studies investigate phenomena in their natural setting. For instance, an experiment might test the effects of a new drug in a controlled environment. At the same time, a case study might examine how patients in different hospitals respond to the same treatment. Next is surveys. Surveys collect data from a large number of respondents, providing broad and often shallow insights. What makes case studies exciting is case studies offer in-depth analysis on fewer cases, providing rich contextual data. For example, a survey might gather data on consumer preference from thousands of respondents, while a case study might explore the buying decision of a small group of consumers in detail. Case studies are preferred in examining contemporary events. Case studies provide a detailed and contextual insight that other methods might often miss. For example, a case study on a tech startup's growth strategy would offer a nuanced understanding of the factors driving their success, which a survey or experiment might not capture. Now, the utilization of a case study, Ying has in his book from 1994, Ying identifies three cases or three main uses of a case study. Number one, exploratory. Exploratory case studies are often a pilot for larger quantitative surveys. They help identify key variables and hypotheses that can be tested later. For example, an exploratory case study on remote work trends might inform a subsequent large-scale survey on remote work practices. Number two, descriptive. Descriptive case studies aim to provide a detailed account on a particular phenomenon. They often are used in accident inquiries or success stories. For example, a descriptive case study might detail the implementations and outcomes of a new health initiative by the government. Number three, Ying also identifies the use of case studies in explanatory cases. Explanatory cases seek to explain the reason behind the phenomena and how it occurred. They are often useful for understanding understanding causal relationships. For instance, an explanatory case study might investigate the factors that led to the success of a social media marketing campaign. Now we move on to Gummison, who expands on Ying's uses of case studies by adding two more applications for case studies. Number one, initiating change. Case studies are often used to initiate change by highlighting issues and prompting actions. For example, a case study on misuse of hospital resources might lead to a policy change and improved management practices. Next, Gummison also highlighted the need to generating the utilization of a case study to generate theory. Case studies can contribute to theory development by providing insights and evidence that lead to new theoretical frameworks. For example, Girsic's 1988 article, Punctuated Equilibrium Theory of a Small Group Dynamics, was developed through case study research, offering new perspectives on organizational change. Right? We'll try to provide you with this article for you to have a look at. Number two, I'm sorry. Now we'll speak about the advantages of a case study as a method. Case studies offer numerous benefits. Number one, there's rich data. Case studies provide detailed and comprehensive data, offering a deep understanding on the subject. This richness is achieved through the use of multiple data resources, such as interviews, observations, and documents. For example, a case study on a successful startup might include a detailed narrative from the founders, financial data, and market analysis. Number two, clues for further research. A case study can generate hypotheses and ideas for further research by developing or revealing patterns and relationships. For example, a case study on a new teaching method might suggest new areas for educational research. Descriptive and explanatory data. Case studies can often gather both descriptive data, which details of what happened, and explanatory data, which explains why and how it happened. For example, a case study on a community development health program might describe the program's implementation and explain the factors contributing to its success. Number four, initiating change and theory generation, which I spoke earlier. Case studies can often prompt by highlighting issues and offering solutions. They can also contribute to theory generation by providing insights that lead to new theoretical frameworks. For example, a case study on organizational behavior might lead to the development of new management theories or practices. Understanding why events happen. A case study can also explain why events occur by providing contextual insights and identifying causal relationships. For example, a case study on a business might reveal underlying issues such as poor management or market conditions at that particular time. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're looking at the criticism of a case study method. Despite there are many benefits, case studies often face several challenges. Number one that I faced during my case study presentation, my viva, was there was a lack of rigor. Case studies can lack rigor if not conducted carefully, leading to bias and unreliable findings. Researchers often needs to ensure that their data is through thorough data collection and analysis to maintain rigor. One example is there's always biasness about case studies. When they hear about case studies, often the impressions that during your viva or during your research, everyone will like, once they hear you're doing a case study, they often like, oh, it doesn't lack the rigor that is required for a PhD. But often, if your case study is able to contain a lot of rich data and highlights the relationships between the stakeholders, you're able to counter this argument for the lack of rigor. Number two, the confusion of case study teaching. It's important to distinguish between case study research and case study teaching. While both involved a detailed examination of cases, case study research aims to generate new knowledge, whereas case study teaching focuses on applying existing knowledge in educational setting. Number three, limited bias for scientific generalizations. One of the main criticisms of case study is their limited generalizability. This because they focus on a single or few cases, it can be difficult to generalize the findings to a broader population. However, the depth and richness of case studies provide valuable insights which then can inform or which then can lead to further research. Number four is often the case that case studies are time-consuming by nature. Case studies can be time-consuming, requiring a lot of extensive data collection and analysis. This can be a drawback, especially when resources are limited. However, the detailed insights gained from case studies often justify the time and effort that is involved. Sometimes when your case studies involved a very specific phenomenon and there's very limited information, if you can gather, or you would need a lot of time to understand what's happening or how it happened, finding out the whys and the whos and the how comes, then it provides a lot of detail. And this would require a lot of time understanding the case, the nuance of the case itself. I pass the floor back to Greg.
Thanks, Vignesh. I actually want to add a couple of thoughts to both your third point and your fourth point. I actually started taking notes as you were talking before. And I like point number three, they provide little basis for scientific generalization. Absolutely spot on with that. But I think what's important is as a researcher, we should never claim that they do provide a generalization. What we are actually creating, or what we are giving in a way, is a voice. And we're giving a voice to the case study, either to the organization or the representative groups in it. I think one of the criticisms that, it can't be generalized to everything. Let's be honest, we can go out and do a survey of 1,000 people. We still cannot generalize that survey to the entire population anyway. So in that respect, don't look at this criticism and say, oh, maybe I should change my approach, because it's just as reliable or unreliable as well as so many of the other methods that went in there. Just also a point on your fourth point, case studies take too long. Let's be honest, they can significantly extend. What you've got to look at is in the PhD process, year one doing your literature review, year two doing your data collection, year three doing your write-up, as a sort of a generic, generalized process. If we're going to go down the case study route, actually the case study is from day one, and it's part of that literature review because you're bringing that in. Although they take long, you've got to be able to say, well, how do I understand and think about the involvement of my case study during the different phases of my research? Because that being said, both of us have used case studies in postgraduate research, and it can be done. It's a rethinking of, at what point does my case study happen? Is my case study data collection? Actually, no, your case study starts well before that. So although it feels like it takes long, you're actually collecting or beginning to collect the data almost as early as day one, potentially. So criticisms are there, and not inappropriate criticisms. But I think we've also got the ability to say, you know what, everything can be massaged a little bit. The criticism isn't valid in terms of how I want to do my own research. Anyway, let me move on, and I'm going to talk about the role of theory in case study research. And this is kind of theoretical in itself as well. The complete research design embodies a theory of what is being studied. This theory should by no means be considered with the formality of grand theory in social science, nor are you being asked to be a masterful theoretician. Rather, the simple goal is to have sufficient blueprint for your study that requires some theoretical propositions. Then complete research design will provide a surprisingly strong guidance in determining what data to collect and the strategies for analyzing the data. For this reason, theory development prior to the collection of any case study data is an essential step in doing your case studies. So I'm not really going to speak a lot to that. That could probably get me going for another half hour or so. But what we want to focus on is, look, actually understanding the theoretical framework that you want to use before you really dive deep into the case study is going to be important. But on the counter side to that, you don't want to be so heavy in theoretical structures that your case study and the theory butt heads against each other as well. Now, you might say, well, aren't I manipulating my case study? And probably the answer is going to be, yeah, that's likely I am. But you also want to make sure that if you're using a case study approach, you're doing it to showcase what's happening on the ground. You're doing it to give a very detailed and perhaps a very nuanced voice towards your research. Whereas if you're looking for something that's going to fit the pockets of a theoretical structure, then a case study might not, give you the best outcome. So you've got to sort of balance that up. The role of theory comes down to that there is a place for the utilization and discussion of theory when using case studies. However, we don't want it to be a theoretically driven scenario where the theory side is so heavy and the case study doesn't always match. We actually want to be able to see what can the case study help us to contribute to our thinking and understanding of the theory. Now, this is my favorite slide of the whole lot because it comes down to my own belief in research, and we all have different beliefs. But how many case studies should I use? And there's a couple of different ones that have been suggested. So there was some recent research a couple of years ago. An Australian doctoral researcher, Chad Perry, did some research, and he looked at the fact that across PhDs embracing the case study method, 2 to 4 was the minimum. So let's say 2 was the minimum, 15 case studies as the maximum. Now, that was sort of juxtaposed against some other research and also what I call collective hive mind, because I went on to some social media groups of professors, examiners, and others, and I asked them what they thought. And the collective hive mind said, look, in a typical PhD, 4 to 8 case studies as a way of informing your data collection, as a way of informing your narrative. 4 to 8 case studies is actually pretty good. So I then go and say, well, I want to ask another question. Can a singular case study be sufficient? And this was a discussion that, again, held with a number of other academics globally. So there is no right answer to this. It doesn't mean just because Craig said one is okay, that one is okay. Always check with your supervisor. But we did look at the fact that, yes, a singular case study can work if it represents the critical test of a significant theory. So maybe we're looking at a significant theory that's out there, and we're able to say, you know what, this theory does not apply in this case, and you've got the data to back it up. It could be a situation where you have a rare phenomenon, so even a single case study is worth documenting. A lot of work at the cutting edge doesn't have precursors to it. It doesn't have the either the data or the existing discussion to really look at what it is and what it's contributing. So therefore, your case study may actually be quite a unique situation. And although there's no other things around it happening, documenting it and showcasing what it means in terms of maybe where society's going or where business is heading or the industry or whatever, it's actually valuable as a contribution. Sometimes we might do a single case study because we have hardly accessible phenomenon. And this can be difficult to access for a lot of reasons. And say, for example, I want to be able to, maybe Vignes will enjoy this case study. I want to be able to do some research on senior politicians' decision-making processes. Now, chances are I'm not going to be able to bowl up to any parliament in any country in the world and get interviews with 100 people. I might, however, be able to get a bit of time with my local MP who says, you know what, I'll participate in this. And this I would call a hardly accessible phenomenon because you're not able to get access to the individuals or to the body of knowledge where you would like to be able to do your research. but you're able to get access to one or two. And in that case, I would say, look, that's still opening the doors wider than any previous research has done. Now, this happens, I've given a political example because top of my head, it's an easy one to think of. This might happen if you're working in a certain industry and you want to interview CEOs. You simply may not. If you want to understand Donald Trump as a business person, that's not going to happen. So, you're going to have different scenarios across the disciplines where you are facing limits, and being offered one element of access is still that starting point. Again, we're not able to generalize everything, and we don't say that my one piece of research is going to revolutionize this whole understanding. It's simply giving voice to the one. You can also use a singular case study if the same case studied at 2 or more points in time. So you've got comparative. How did it change from 1995 to 2015, for example? Maybe a prior researcher has done this case study and they've actually been able to, you've been able to access historical notes on it. And now you're bringing it to update. Now that's something that is an aspect of research that I've worked on, where I've been given historical research on a singular case study. And my job has been to modernize that in terms of replicating the data collection for the current time and then being able to compare. Now that becomes a longitudinal piece of research, but it becomes a longitudinal case study, and you're able to demonstrate and talk about the evolutions and the changes that have happened. And finally, and this was sort of a question I'd written down while Vignesh was talking, but it was also answered by him a little bit too. A single case as a pilot for a more complex research design. I think the relevant point here is that a simple case study, not too complicated, can actually help us develop a broader research pattern. If we're using a single case as a pilot, I personally believe that case study research lends itself very well to this. I personally believe that it is encouraging of either a multi-method or mixed method research design approach. And considering case studies as pilots is actually very valuable. But flip side too, considering other alternatives for a pilot and then using a case study to really delve in and explore some of the issues discussed in, say, a pilot survey or a pilot interview is also extremely valuable. For that reason, I'm saying, look, we don't say no to case studies at doctoral level because there is value. It's about how we are going to embed them in our framework. So my last line on the slide is, look, at master's level case studies are brilliant. At PhD level, yes, with conditions. And I want to argue that the condition is more likely to be, how are we bringing in alternative data sources for triangulation? Or how are we making or embedding the case study into a multi-method or a mixed method approach so that we can get even stronger understanding of what we are researching? Now, it also comes down to the concept of representativeness. Please do not ask me to say that word twice. And this is really just coming down to selecting or justifying your sample, building your case defense. If I choose a sample of 1, I've got a lot of defending to do because at the end of the day, out of a whole world of 8 billion people, I have no idea how many businesses or entities exist in that. We know there are close to 200 sovereign nations in that. I do a single case. How do I defend it against everything else on a greater population? And there's a few sort of examples here. One is typical cases. This represents a typical case within our industry, or this represents a typical case within our society. Say, for example, I choose to do some research on a bank. It is a typical case, Maybank versus the 12 other banks that are available in Malaysia, for example. Then I have extreme cases. Extreme because you know that what they are doing is very, very different to the norm. Now, that's a subjective judgment. It's a very subjective judgment because we're looking at it from the outside and we're saying, you know what, this one is odd. Now, I don't want to sort of get into the politics of extremities here and give examples, but I'm going to sort of carefully tread. So the social credit justice system in China, for example, might be considered an extreme case of how artificial intelligence, databases, facial recognition, all that sort of thing is being used versus, nearly 200 other countries which don't have this. Now, we all kind of know, but it's sort of been fueled by media, but we all kind of know that there is a unique system in China that sort of helps to regulate social life. This is a case study because it's extreme, because it isn't seen elsewhere. This is a case study becomes interesting because while we might all jump on and say at first, oh, we don't want that, you still need a case study that examines it in depth to be able to say, actually, there's some good parts to it. There's some good parts, there's some bad parts, but you can form a conclusion when you have more knowledge. Diversified cases, especially if we're not using a singular case study, we're using multiple case studies. Diversified cases mean, look, I can pick several different case studies that fit in different parts of a spectrum of what's happening within the space that we're researching. So it gives us that opportunity to showcase different approaches. Now, in education, I would say this works very well. We might look at government schools, rural areas, government schools, urban areas, private schools, urban areas, international schools, urban areas. And you'll note I didn't put private or international for rural because they don't typically tend to be there. But if I found one, that would be considered diversified as well. But the case study from those few different categories of schools and using one case study from each as a comparative would actually lend value to what you're trying to do. But you're also getting that representativeness. Yeah, I said it a second time. You're getting that because you're giving voice to different perspectives or different experiences within the broader spectrum. Now, the last one is not going to be my favorite because I'm not a fan of this concept. Basically, we'll just say convenient sampling. The most accessible cases are the ones that we can get to. And that really is the same as convenient sampling. Now, I can defend convenient sampling. Let's be honest. You're trying to get research. These people have offered you contribution. These people have offered you contribution via data, effectively. I'm not going to say no. But at the end of the day, if you are using what is most accessible, one that helps you get your research, so woohoo, good for you for that. You've just got to be able to recognize that using the most accessible means your findings are less generalizable than if, say, I used a set of diversified cases where you've at least tried to get a representation from other parts of the community. So it's not to say you can't go for the convenience, because absolutely you can. You've got to be able to explain it and be transparent about that, because that's going to then influence how much can I build from that particular experience. Interpreting good case study data, and I'm sort of really going to rush through this one because I'm conscious of time. Zaborek in 2009 looked at how we can use case study data most effectively. And for a doctoral research, it was focusing on the deductive approach. Now, I really sort of just want to move on and wrap up. What I will do tomorrow is put up the actual reference, the complete reference for this, so that you can look at it. The reason I'm not going to talk about it really tonight is it's not about how we structure or bring in the case study to our research. It's what we do with it afterwards. And that itself can be a significant, not only a webinar, it could almost be a boot camp, because there's a lot of things to cover. But I will get the reference, the full reference for you, put that out there. And perhaps later we can do a topic, a webinar topic or something that looks more specifically at how we as researchers then use the data from the case study and what we're going to do with it. Now, there are some ambiguities, but there are also opportunities in our case study research. And I sort of wanted to go through this just to, I guess, make you aware of what they are. At the end of the day, I'll go on record as this. I don't care so much how you choose to do your research. I care about how you justify the decisions that you make as a researcher in obtaining the data, in analyzing that data, and in communicating that data to me. What makes you a PhD graduate is not so much the research itself, that's a part of it, but what really crosses the line, and this comes through your viva, when somebody, a panel of experts start grilling you about your choices, what comes through is the decisions that you made. So this is sort of to make you aware and to think about some of the issues. Some say that only qualitative methods should be used in a case study. So people like John Cresswell, for example, the irony there is the father of mixed methods tells us we should only use qualitative. I'm beginning to like him more. Whilst others advocate the methods of quantitative, for example, Robert Yin. Case studies are more holistic, taking both. I actually see case study having a great opportunity to use both qualitative and quantitative. But it's interesting to see that different leading figures, because, we have the case study guru and we have the mixed methods guru here, sort of tugging at us in different ways. Again, as a researcher, you've got to say, well, what's your point? How do you understand how we research the world and what's important to make? Personally, I actually feel that quantitative in a case study does have a place, and it could be very insightful for us. Certainly, we are going to be collecting secondary data that is going to be very likely in numeric form. So we're going to have some form of loose quantitative to start with. The most frequent objection to case studies is its low generalizability, i.e. external validity, given that only one or a few cases are studied. That's true, that is an ambiguity, but again, we have to come back to the fact that we're not promising we've researched the world. We're promising we've researched this tiny little world within the world. and we're going to give a very detailed analysis about it. If I look at any research study that does not use big data, I would argue the same thing is applicable for that as well. Some question the researcher's role in relation to obtaining the results because of the methods used, which can be linked to the personality of the researcher, so participant observation, in-depth interviews. Now, this is an ambiguity because people are saying, well, you can't have such great quality research because you were involved. But we are involved in anything that we do on a qualitative approach, and to some extent, in a quantitative approach as well. That's a whole different level of crazy to explain, but it does exist. It's very ambiguous. At the end of the day, we have found a population of interest. We have found a sample within that population of interest, and we've used robust methods. Now, it comes down to this: transparency of how you've collected the data, how you've analyzed the data. As long as that transparency is there to enable another researcher to potentially replicate what you've got, you have robust research. So if your supervisor says, well, your relationship to that case study, that's fine. It's your responsibility to be very transparent. If you're researching, say, a business owned by your parents, transparency is saying, I grew up in this business. I understand it the most, almost as much, perhaps, as the founders. I want to see the value. I want to see what I can contribute from it. The transparency about your relationship to what you are researching, your positionality, and also in an extent, your worldview is important. And that is what I look for in the research first, understanding why this, how you think about it, so forth. And then I look for the transparency of methods. The use of a single case can have severe limitations, both in terms of data analysis, generalizability, hence the tendency to compare. Absolutely true. But sometimes we are not going to have access, or there may not even be an alternative case study for us to be able to do. Someone has got to lead that way. And as PhD researchers, we are supposed to be at the cutting edge of new research. Therefore, if we find that unicorn, we should actually take advantage of that. Triangulation is an important aspect of a case study. Absolutely. The holistic approach includes looking at the object as a whole and then the open-ended approach of the researcher, so questions. We've got to bring data together from multiple sources, overlap it, triangulate it, in order for us to be able to make statements that represent. But this is the same as in anything else. All of our research is triangulation. We start with the literature review, we then do our own data collection, and we showcase the relationship. Same thing in my mind. And the last one on this page, research design emerges and evolves, and researcher carries out many activities in a rather unplanned way, depending on how things go, rather than in a linear, serial, structured way, as in an experiment or survey. You continuously move back and forward in your design and project stages. This is true. I think there'll be none of us in this room tonight, none of us who have engaged with any of us, that have ever planned research A, B, C, and discovered that the only research they did was A, B, and C. There are always variations, there are always changes, there's always an evolution based on data that you get, things that you see, questions that remain unanswered, or questions that remain answered and you've got to evolve from. I think this is a really good article. As you see, I've put the citation down, but I'll put these on social media tomorrow. If you are going through case study research and you're finding a little bit of pushback from either your supervisor or other people that are in your network of mentors or network of support, this is a good article for you to sort of read up on. When it comes to your Viva, our goal is to push your buttons. Our goal is to make sure that you really understood not only your research, but the decisions you made. This would help you answer or think about to frame the answer for some of the questions that might come not only on your choice of case study research, but the decisions to engage with it. Some parting words, and I think this is my final slide. Just give me a second to check. I do believe this is my final slide. Yes, it is. So Farrell, we can do Q&A in a minute. Some parting words that give credence to the purpose of a case study. And I'm just going to read this quote before I make my own comment on it. The real business of case study is particularization, not generalization. We take a particular case and come to know it well. There's an emphasis on uniqueness. We emphasize placing an observer in the field to observe the workings of the case, one who records objectively what is happening, but simultaneously examines its meaning and redirects observation to refine or to substantiate those meanings. I want to put it in a bigger perspective. As a PhD research candidate, you become the world-leading expert on one thing. Out of everything in the world, you become the world-leading expert on one thing. Isn't that itself the case study approach? Because through a case study, you understand that one case study better than anybody else. So I like the first sentence. The real business of case studies is particularization, not generalization. When we're communicating our research, when we're trying to take lessons from our research to others, it's not about saying, well, because it happened in company X, every other company in the world has to do it this way. We're simply saying, this was the company X experience. Let's analyze it. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up and hand over to Farrell if there's